Hi, I'm Michelle Shingler, the editor-in-chief of Foreword Reviews, and you're tuning into Petit Foreword, our bite-sized interviews with indie authors. Today we're speaking with Laura Stanfill, a dynamic author and the beloved publisher of Forest Avenue Press. Her latest book, Imagine a Door, is an empathetic and formative guide through the world of writing and publishing. It releases on April 1st. Laura, thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much, Michelle, for having me today.
So one of the qualities that struck me most about Imagine the Door was the sheer joy it exudes when you're discussing writing as a practice. Why do you think joy is such a crucial tool for writers in general?
Well, so much of the time writers get hung up on the publishing piece of wanting to craft something that will have an identity outside of their lives or outside of their home or outside of their brain. And when we get thinking like that, we put roadblocks in front of us as creators because we're writing for someone else or toward someone else. And you know what? Joy cuts through that. Joy is certainly a way to get into what you're thinking about and play with it and step over those roadblocks. It allows writing to become a practice for yourself and not for other people.
Your guide is warm and encouraging throughout, full of so much advice that I think writers are just yearning to hear. What's the best piece of advice you have for people who are struggling with roadblocks like imposter syndrome or negative feedback?
This one is kind of the reason I wrote this book. I knew so many writers when I was starting publishing, and then when I began writing Imagine a Door in 2016, so many writers trying to find their way through and feeling really discouraged because other writers were posting their happy, joyful, shiny content on social media. And everyone on the other side of the door trying to break into publishing felt like they were never going to get there. And so, what I wanted to do was write about the inside part of publishing. And the best piece of feedback I would say is close off social media for the moment. If you're starting to feel like you're comparing your writing, your work, or how you do your work, or the potential success of your work, if you're comparing that with other writers, you need to step away from that stream of content. And this is exciting, go talk to a friend, a real person who is doing the work, who is writing, who has had struggles, who is able to sit with you and conversation with you about your writing and about where you are in the process. Because once we share genuinely how we feel about our writing or our frustrations or our rejections or our fears, then other people will share too and normalize that conversation. And that cuts through all the shininess and allows people to feel less alone with their feelings.
That's such wonderful advice. Why is self-care such a crucial part to the practice of writing?
Well, writing's all about connecting with other people to bring our own empathy and ideas and inspirations and silliness and differences into the conversation with other people. And in order to be able to do that, we really need to be able to sit with ourselves and honor what we want to say and not try to shut ourselves down or put those roadblocks in front of us, like I was saying before. And so ultimately, I think we deserve as creative people to preserve ourselves. And any way you can do that is important. Self care could be anything that feels good to you, but it's important to practice it so that you preserve what's inside you and you don't tilt away from the act of creation. Because once you start tilting away and looking everywhere else for inspiration or for praise, you start losing that kindling feeling of what has gotten you to be a writer in the first place. So preserve that flame.
That's perfect. You also mentioned reading widely and with abandon. Why is that so crucial to the practice of writing?
Well, I have a lot of answers to this question. One of them is it's important as writers to support other writers. If we someday want to have a book in the world, you should be reading other people's books and understanding what the landscape is. It's also great to build your writer brain when you engage with a novel or a memoir or a poetry collection. You are picking up all these tips and tricks about how to structure things, how a voice works, what point of view is, what settings really speak to you or don't. And all of that information is great for your writing brain. Most of all, though, my favorite part about reading is connecting with child me. I think so much of writers building careers are about being an adult and taking this craft seriously, and that's important. But I lost, I don't know, 10 or 20 good years of reading to reading as an analyst, to trying to figure out how the person had told the story. And really, during COVID times, I started reading just for pleasure again. And that little 8-year-old Laura who just wanted to be in the car for 5 more minutes so I could finish a chapter, she's back. She's been there all along, but I'm letting her do the reading now. And reading sustains me and fulfills me and makes me happy. And again, that's part of the kindling of your own creative identity, is being able to enjoy books for what they are. And also to spend time on one person's ideas instead of the fire hose of content that's out there. When you sit with a book, you're sitting with one person's brain. And that's important and exciting.
You also point out that publication isn't the only reason to write. You've mentioned this a little before too. Can you share some possible other reasons that writers who are struggling to own their work should look for?
This is such a great question too. I feel like everyone should write for themselves. My mother-in-law even writes. She keeps a journal, and it's different from what I consider writing. Because she likes to mention what the weather is like and whether she's gotten groceries that day or who sent her a letter. But it all counts as writing, and she is articulating how she feels about the day in a way that feels good for her. So for yourself is one thing. I also find writing is great for understanding how your brain works. I am neurodivergent and proud of it. And what is interesting and fun about my work is because of how my brain works. And to sit in conversation with yourself and put words down can help you have a better understanding of the trajectory of your life and who you are as a person. It's also great for reliving memories and for memorializing or eulogizing people you miss or times you miss, how things were different. Certainly for handling trauma and going through something, writing your way through it gives you the quiet space to really acknowledge what happened to you and get clear about it in your own heart. And there are just plenty of ways to get your work into the world once you've done the writing besides publishing. I think sometimes we get hung up on it. I love it when people make zines and go Xerox their words and staple them and pass out zines. I love the proliferation of newsletters these days where people are sharing what they're thinking about in ways that feels really accessible. Speaking gigs are a great way to share work. I think a number of writers don't always consider that is a way of making your work public, but it's really wonderful because you get response in real time, and it's an experience that happens in that moment in a community with people around you, whether that's around you on a Zoom screen or in person. It's a way to see your work connect with other people. You don't necessarily need to go get something published in a book to have it impact other people. And also, I always acknowledge and encourage writing letters to friends because we tend to not make time for that anymore. And it's special when something handwritten shows up, even if it's only a few lines. So
I love getting handwritten letters from friends.
yeah.
So you have a very unique and wonderful writing and publishing ethos. What experiences best help to define that?
I guess I'll say the shift that occurred many years ago. When I was starting out as a writer, I read all the advice books. I read all the books like mine, actually, and trying to understand what it would take to be a real writer. I had big plans, capital B, capital P, big plans. And I wanted to know how to do it. And a lot of the advice didn't work for me. One of the things that I like to share regularly is I used to think I needed a routine because that's what serious writers did. They would write at the same time in the same place every day. Well, having kids, having disabilities, being neurodivergent, an unpredictable schedule, so forth and so on, it's really hard for me to sit down and write every day. And for a long time, I held that against myself. I thought I am not a real writer, or I'm not a good enough writer because I don't get up and write at 7:45 in the morning like clockwork, like I'm supposed to. So my ethos has shifted at some point where I realized that it's not about doing the work the way other people tell you to. It's doing the work in a way that is meaningful to you, that works for your schedule, that works for your disabilities or your health, that works for your brain. And doing the work when you can is such an exciting way to look at it and to just turn that advice on its side. And I think that's what matters, is sitting down and doing the work. Somebody recently told me to try to touch the work every day. And I love that idea of touching it, because that doesn't necessarily mean you have to go for a certain word count. If your word count plans, if you're structured and you need to hit a word count every day, more power to you. That's amazing. If you like to write at the same time every day or once a week at the same time, that is amazing. More power to you. Those things don't work for me, but what works for me is this idea of touching it. Think about your book every day. You can open up a page. You can jot something down on a notebook. You can read what you wrote yesterday. You can think about it while you're sitting on the sidelines at roller derby practice, and just keep your brain engaged in your work in progress. Whether it's a story or a poem or an essay or a novel or a memoir, just having a little touch of your brain to the intent of your goal for the work or specific words on the page helps you keep going.
Yeah, that's so fantastic. I loved in the book when you talked about living with your character at the grocery store. That counts. You're in the writing process if you're thinking about your character at the grocery store or on the sidelines at roller derby practice.
Yeah, so much of this book came about when my kids were young, because I was brainstorming and putting quotes together and the seeds of the project together. And there were so many hours that I just needed intellectual stimulation, and so working on one of my novels, or then later on working on this project, in those in-between moments was a really great way to step away from the pressure and step away from the stress of being like, oh my gosh, I must finish this chapter. And just keeping it in my head at the grocery store is a great way to kindle new ideas and just sit with your project, even if you don't have a minute to jot anything down. It'll be there when you sit back down the next time.
For sure. So there's also a radical quality to your advice that I loved, particularly in these challenging times. You discussed community engagement and staying in communication with local libraries and bookstores, and you also warn against appropriation and encourage people to use sensitivity readers. Why are these pieces of advice so important right now?
Well, because they've always been important in some ways. I love that you use the word radical in this conversation, because when I was writing this book a couple years ago, I really struggled with how much of me to put in. And for a long time, earlier drafts were about all the other quotes. I've quoted, I think, more than 75 experts, a lot of them in publishing, editorial and publishers and agents and authors, and a lot of names you probably haven't heard of before, because I wanted it to be about us, the writers, and not about the famous writers, or just focus on the people who have household name recognition. So I went to press on January 6th, actually, with this book. And it was before our current president took office. And I knew things were about to change, but I didn't know how. And I decided that this whole project is about being honest and genuine with ourselves and with each other as writers, because that's where our work comes from. You can write the most silly, zany, outer space, sci-fi, whatever piece of work. And it's still the pieces that make it your book are about you and your identity and what you believe the world should look like or could look like. Um, it's a statement when you put a book into the world of your belief system. And so I did reread my section about appropriation and worry about it a few extra times before I went to press. But there's nothing actually radical in there. I'm writing about compassion and identity. Why would I want, as a white person, to step over somebody else's identity or step on it to try to simulate what I think might be the lived experience of someone who is a person of color or a trans person? Why would I do that? I don't, that doesn't appeal to me. That's not interesting to me. I would rather open the door and save space and increase space and build places for those voices to come through on their own without using my lens, because I have one lens. And so I decided that I was going to keep it all as is. It's very clear in the book how much community building is important to me, and how, if you're in community with people who have different perspectives and thoughts and opinions and different identities, you learn so much, and your life is so much better and richer, and your worldview changes because you are not just talking to people who look and act and sound like you. And I think right now we see the flattening of identity coming from the White House and coming from the government. And it's politicizing, but it's also a flattening, turning real lived experiences back into stereotypes and talking points. And haven't we done that already? We don't, I don't want that. I don't want to live like that. And I don't believe in that. And so I went to press with this book that I think is genuine more than radical. But I do realize in these political times where there is talk of retribution and pulling funding, that it's even more important for those of us who are independent artists and independent business owners, do it yourselfers, to speak up and speak loudly for these principles. So it might be radical that I'm saying it right now, but it's really all about compassion and listening and being in community with people who are different than you. And that shouldn't be political. Since when is compassion political? I just
Fully agreed. This is going to be such a bomb to so many people. So I'm very excited about that.
So, and I hope the writers who are feeling like their identities are getting politicized see themselves in the people I chose to quote in the book, and in the staunch support of identity, in writing, and giving space for people with underrepresented voices to share their stories. I hope they see themselves in there, even though I am a white person coming from a particular point of view. That's why I quoted so many people. That's why I have a 522-page book. I just kept adding other people's voices because I wanted everyone to see themselves in the book.
Yeah, and that's Forest Avenue too. You guys have such a great catalog and includes so many voices.
We love that about our authors, and we're reading submissions right now, and we are just boggled by how many smart, strange, wonderful projects are out there. And we're making a lot of hard choices right now because there's so much bounty out there.
Yeah, that's exciting to hear also. So thank you so much again for joining us, Laura. To our audience, a reminder that Imagine a Door releases on April 1st. You don't want to miss it. It's an amazing, supportive writer's resource, and we know that you're going to return to it again and again throughout your writing lives.
Thank you so much, Michelle.